with this one. That theme tune, they're going to have to let it down now before you go.
Yeah, I'm not going to sort of lose that in a hurry, am I?
No.
But it was great. It was great. Who watched I'm a Celebrity? Yeah. Who wants to go on I'm a Celebrity? Oh, come on. What's the matter with you? It's easy. No, it isn't. It was, actually, I tell you what, it was really, really tough. Physically very, very tough. No tea, no coffee, no sugar, no salt, and most important of all, no alcohol. For 24 days. But what people miss more than anything, funny enough, was coffee. You don't realise if you drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee every day, just how dependent on coffee we all are. And but I miss the booze more personally.
So when Nigel went in the jungle, I messaged him, and I felt he should have won it, didn't you? Yeah. He should have won that. He did win it, really, but for whatever reason. I think some bits were edited and so on in a certain way. But then he came out, I left him for a few days, just a few days, and I messaged him and said, can you come to my event in Devon? He booked it in. I said, you're really serious? Because he's in high demand at the minute, this guy. And he said, oh, Matt, if I'm going to do something, I'm doing it. But he may have woke up this morning and thought, what the hell did I agree to do that for? But he looked at the map, but he loves Devon anyway. So, I know you've all got these questions with him, but we'll get to the point. What the fuck is going on with our country? What a mess, the taxes, the potholes, everything. Can't get it done. Most of the people in this room are flipping GPs and one out of the NHS. Irene over there, got doctors.
Yeah.
They're all coming in for mentoring, start their own business. We don't have no flipping doctors. I've got to rely on befriending them, doing them deals against the So what is it? What's going on?
I think that, the old saying that the fish rots from the head down, there's a lot of truth in that. People respond to leadership. People respond in a company to good leadership. Then they respond in a country to good leadership. I'm a cricket fan. 17 test matches, Joe Root was captain, we won one of them. Ben Stokes became captain, we won 9 out of the first 10. Same players, same talent, same ability, but we all respond to leadership. And I'm afraid what's happened with our politics is we finished up with a group of careerists, an awful lot of charlatans, and whilst there are 1 or 2 good people there, they are massively outnumbered. And you can't have good public services, you can't have good roads, you can't have all those things unless you create wealth. And we're not creating wealth, we're not growing. The economy has now been stagnant now for the last 2 years. We're in a mild technical recession, and nothing is done in this country to help the one group of people who create more wealth than anybody else, and that is small and medium-sized enterprises. That is where 60% of the employment comes from in private business. It's a bit sort of in and out. And we're not creating wealth. Every single year we borrow more money as a government, spend more money, we spend more than we earn, and the deficit gets bigger. So Matt, we've got a major problem. Older people in the room will remember the 1970s.
Yeah.
It wasn't dissimilar, was it?
Margaret Thatcher.
We had. Well, I'm going to come to the Blessed Margaret in just a moment. But we had 27% inflation. We had a 3-day week. We had strikes. We were the sick man of Europe, and it felt, to all intents and purposes, like the country was going down the tubes. And yet, we turned it around. It was dramatically turned around in the 1980s, and we had 20 years, actually quite good prosperity, our public services working pretty well, and we've lost sight of all of that. And right at the minute, we have a Conservative government who are not Conservative in anything, and who completely lost touch with the business community to create wealth. And we've got an incoming Labour government that's going to be even worse. And what upsets me is this: whether you voted Remain or Leave, we made a very major constitutional decision. We decided, in future, we're going to run our own lives, make our own laws, be in control of our own businesses. But the problem is the Conservatives got elected with an 80-seat majority and never believed in it. If it was going to be a little bit more difficult to trade with Europe, I accept that, because it then became easier to trade with other parts of the world. But most important of all, it meant we could deregulate and help businesses that felt overburdened by the authorities, by regulations. How many people in this room would say that the regulations on their business have got easier since the Brexit vote. Well, there you are. There you are. I've been busy investing in setting up a small business in the fishing industry over the course of the last year. We're now being regulated worse than we were even in the European Union. And our bureaucracy, our quangos are completely out of control, and our politicians are not tough enough to fight them. Liz Truss, whatever you think of her, did actually try to stop corporation tax going up to 25%, right? Something that would have helped every one of you in this room. Liz Truss was the first Prime Minister in modern times to say, let's look at the IR35 regulations. You know, so many people in their 50s just packing up work because they're not allowed to put their genuine expenses, you know, against the income they get. What's the point of working? And she was crushed. And she was crushed by the quangos. She was crushed by the Bank of England. Margaret Thatcher was called out a few moments ago. She actually had the guts to take on the administrative state. She closed down the quangos, she upset the civil service, she upset the BBC, good. And so what we desperately need, we need leadership and we need vision. And vision is not following what a focus group says. Anyone can do that. Vision is explaining to the country we're going on a journey. This is where we're going. Some of it will be tough. Some of it will be bumpy. Some of it will be very, very difficult. But you know, we can see what the prize is and where we need to get to. And that is what we are totally lacking in the country. And that doesn't mean you can't run a successful business. Doesn't mean you can't prosper. Doesn't mean you can't get rich. It's just harder to do it, and fewer people will do it, unless we had a government that made it easier. So, you know, I'm not giving you the counsel of despair. There are still ways to succeed. Of course there are lots of ways to succeed. But I just think if government helped a bit, then a lot more people would go out, set up businesses, borrow money, take risk. And I repeat back to where I started. You cannot have the good things in life unless you have the income to afford them. And we all know that at a family level, in terms of what house we buy, what car we buy, where we go on holiday, whether we order the extra pint, or whatever it may be. But the same principles apply at a national level. And we are living beyond our means, we are not creating enough wealth, and we need to understand, without money creation, we cannot have all the things we need to feel like a modern 21st century country.
Let's talk about the NHS thing first, because I don't know about you, I can't get a doctor's appointment for my kids, nothing at all. It's a complete, no disrespect for the GPs here today, but you're here for another reason, so clearly you're going to quit on us as well. They're not paid enough. I don't mean you talked about this backstage of a TV set once. Your thoughts on the NHS and where that's going. Is it the agenda? I'm putting you on the spot here, but it's okay, it's not a podcast, it's just that. Don't tell anyone. Do you believe it's the agenda, they want the thing to go bust, so like Richard Branson taking over your mate Donald Trump?
Well, we'll come to Donald Trump later.
I'll do a Donald Trump question later too.
We will, don't worry, we will. No, look, I mean, of course they don't want it to go bust. They'd like it to work. But the NHS is facing a massive problem, just as we're facing a massive housing problem, just as we're facing an enormous, most days, road traffic problem, just as we're facing a problem with a lack of spaces in primary schools. And here it is, folks, unvarnished, and you won't hear this from anybody else. You won't hear this from anybody else. They dare not tell you the truth. When the subject of immigration comes up, everyone goes, oh my God, we can't discuss that. It's all too difficult. It's all too awkward. A quick history lesson, right? After World War II, we felt as a country that we owed the Commonwealth, former empire, Commonwealth countries, a great debt. 40% of all the manpower and womanpower that fought in 2 world wars for us, 40% came from the rest of the world. It came from India, it came from Australia, it came from New Zealand, it came from Jamaica, and so on and so forth. And we felt as a result of what had been given that we owed a debt. And that's why Windrush happened, right? That's why that first boat from Jamaica came in the late 1940s. From the late 1940s to the late 1990s, annual net migration into Britain ran at 30,000 people a year, right? 30,000 people a year, net for half a century, are the numbers that came into Britain. Anyone know how many people came into Britain last year? 750,000 net. 1.2 million gross. And even in a normal year now, net migration runs at 1/3 of a million. We had a population when Blair came to power of 58 million. We have an official population now of 68 million. Right? Now if you add this massive increase in population to the first point I made about the lack of wealth creation, are you beginning to understand why we might have a problem in this country? And we've literally allowed the doors to open. We have no control, almost no control over the numbers that come. Therefore, we do not have enough hospitals. We do not have enough schools, and we certainly don't have enough houses. And one of the reasons why the Tories will get smashed to smithereens at the next election, even if I don't directly involve myself.
Nigel for Prime Minister.
But one of the reasons they'll get smashed is they promised to get a grip on this. They promised us in the 2010 manifesto they'd return net migration to tens of thousands a year, back to what it had been ever since the war. They promised it again in 2015, again in 2017, and then in 2019, Boris got an 80-seat majority from people who said, number one, legal migration must be properly, sensibly controlled. We're pro-immigration, but we have to have limits on it. And illegal immigration is an abomination and an insult, frankly, to everybody. It's the biggest insult to those that have come legally. Because if you come legally to Britain, it's quite expensive now to get naturalisation, to get a passport and everything else. So we have a massive problem. The NHS cannot cope. I'll add to that something else. When I was in Australia, the day before I went into the jungle, I was walking along this beautiful Gold Coast beach, thinking to myself, I must be absolutely stark, raving mad to be going into the jungle. And there was a lad there fishing with his father, and I had my wraparounds on and my baseball cap on, hoping that nobody would recognise me, and he called me over. He was an English guy. And he'd just gone through 7 years of training under the NHS as an orthopaedic surgeon, right? He'd qualified, and the first thing he did was to bugger off to live in Australia, where the salary is about double what it would have been in the UK. Now, I don't blame him for choosing moving to Queensland, but we should not, and I'd love to get some doctors to comment on this, please, but I believe we should not be putting large amounts of taxpayers' money into training nurses and doctors who are then allowed to leave and go and work somewhere else around the rest of the world, leaving us. I mean, the whole thing's mad. It's mad. And we then take nurses and doctors from countries like Mauritania, who probably need nurses and doctors even more than we do. The whole thing is crackers. And we have totally devalued, and this goes a bit more broadly, into the STEM subjects. Science, technology, engineering, maths. These are all the things that you need in the 21st century as a country to survive and thrive. And what we've been doing is we've driven, in the last 20 years, millions of kids to university, telling them that this is their guaranteed route to success. They've been doing media studies, social sciences, golf course management, I mean, you name it, racking up great big debts, coming out of university, actually, no further forward in the jobs marketplace than they would have been. What we should have been done, what we should do now, right now, is say, if you want to go to university to study one of those STEM subjects, there will be no university fees whatsoever. We need to start training young people into understanding that trades and skills are vital. I've got friends, because I used to work in business before, and we'll probably come to that. I've got friends in the engineering sector who literally have to employ from abroad because we're not training enough people. So we're underskilling our own people, and that includes nursing too. Nursing used to be considered to be, a fine profession for a young man or a young woman to go into. Now, we're not encouraging people to go into nursing. We just think we can drain the rest of the world of people. So we have to reduce net migration. We have to absolutely start reskilling our own people. I would indenture anyone like that orthopaedic surgeon. Sorry, mate, we've invested 7 years of our money and time in you. You owe us 5 or 10 years of your working life. Otherwise, Otherwise, we're going to fine you or do whatever we can do. And finally, with the NHS, the one thing, I mean, there's no easy answer to this, but when you see that since Blair came to power and the massively increased money we put into it, by the way, don't think we're not spending money on the NHS. We were spending 8% of GDP on health 5 years ago. We're now spending 12%. We're spending 50% more on the NHS, and all of us feel we're getting a worse return. That suggests to me very, very bad management. There's been a 44% increase in administrative staff. There are now more people working for the NHS not involved with frontline health delivery than not. Can you believe that? Yeah. Can you believe that? Yeah. So again, we need, when things are broken, and I think the NHS is broken, I think much of modern Britain, to be frank, is broken. When things are broken, you need radical surgery. And to have radical surgery, you need visionary leaders. And frankly, when it comes to the way the NHS is managed, Matt, I'd sack the blooming lot, I'd start again, I'd hire a few successful entrepreneurs and say, get in there, sack anyone you want to, get on with it, shake your head.
Jessen, I'll let you throw a question in.
I've got a mic for yours.
Mike.
So, thank you, Nigel. Music to my ear. There's two things I want to talk about personally, because I think it's relevant. First, let's go with the immigration thing for a start. Believe it or not, or you probably do believe it, Matt and I got a lot of stick for posting about you. Now
Like expand on that.
Yeah, of course.
So one of my team members is here she's from South Africa. Where is she? Bridget. There she is. And she messaged me out of the blue. So Matt, can you tell me what a bell end is, please? So I drew her a picture and sent her a message. That was to do with a post about Nigel. That's when you know you made it.
At least you know what a bell end is now. So yeah, we got a lot of stick. I got stick in a different way. Because I'm slightly more tanned than Matt is. And just a bit. He wants to be like me when he grows up. And it was specifically around, Nigel's a racist, Nigel's a this, Nigel's a that. I said, what? So what are you calling me? Am I a coconut? What are you calling me now? I don't know. But the point is this. I agree with a lot of what you say, and it's purely, I was born and bred in the UK,
yeah.
Of immigrant parents, it's all good. I think the country's gone mad because people are coming to the country and abusing it. And my point is this. We're here in the UK. There was a BBC presenter, a radio presenter recently of Asian origin who went on the news and made a public declaration about when he goes to work, he now suffers with mental health issues because there's too many white colleagues. And my initial thoughts, then there was loads of brown people backing this guy. And I was like, I'm the only brown guy not backing this guy. Because it's such a dickhead statement. I mean, we're in a white-dominated country, population-wise. What were you expecting to find at work? It's like me going to China and saying, well, I've got mental health issues, everyone's Chinese. No shit, Sherlock, right? So, my question is this. What can we do to educate people who are of immigrant descent or from a different country living in the UK right now to understand that this is our country? You may not agree with how things are done and how we do them, whatever it might be, but you're not a tree, move. In a nice, elegant way. What would
look, I mean, this whole cultural thing is nonsense, isn't it? I mean, the idea that, they can call it what they like. It's because they can't deal with the argument. The logic of the argument about numbers, folks, I think it makes sense. This isn't working. I also think what is absolutely catastrophic is identity politics. You're black, you're white, you're gay, you're this, you're that. We're all to be put into separate silos. And we're going to give special rights to black people, and special rights to Asian people, and special rights to gay people. Do you know what? This is all absolute total nonsense. It's divisive, it's dangerous, it's disastrous, it doesn't work. And in some American universities now, they're having different graduation days. They're having Asian graduation days, black graduation days, white graduation days. And just think about this. The most effective civil rights campaigner of the 20th century bar none, and I actually think the best orator of the last century, I can't think of anyone better, Martin Luther King was a phenomenal human being. I mean, when he spoke, it was almost like he was singing. And remember the famous I Have a Dream speech. What did he say? He said, I have a dream that one day my 4 children will grow up in a country where they are judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I am sick to death of identity politics. I'm sick to death of this idea that you must have group rights given out to people. It's all cobblers. We should treat everybody the same, everybody equal before the law. And if we don't do that, we're going to finish up with a grievance culture. And one of the most appalling things that is going on in our schools right now is they're telling 8-year-old white kids that they're oppressors and 8-year-old black kids that they're victims. You should never, ever, ever tell any kid that he or she are a victim. What you should tell every kid is they need to use what talents they've got to make the best of things to be a success in life. And to say to, the thought of kids coming home aged 8 from school crying because they've been told by the teacher that their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather might have done something beastly. I mean, this is all going in the wrong direction. If you believe in real equality, then let's stop dividing people up, treat everybody the same, and we'll treat people as to whether they're good people or bad people, not what their sexual preference or race is. We've got to end this blooming nonsense.
Yes. Back to the economy.
Yeah.
Clearly, look, it's a bit of a joke what's going on. We were speaking about this in the back room. And I remember, I don't know if you remember, before we went into the jungle, we was at the Gherkin. There was an event there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something which, for me, just made perfect sense. The government, in my opinion, the government is a business. It's a business. Lots of different departments, bleeding money left, right and centre and all kinds of stuff. Run by people who are non-entrepreneurial people. We're also, you mentioned, we're paying, I think, over 100 million in interest alone.
Debt interest.
On debt that we haven't, we didn't borrow, the government borrowed, and we're paying for the interest, by the way.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Which we didn't ask them to do. And it's, like you said, the only way out of this is to dig ourselves out of it through stimulating the economy. So, leadership is one thing, Nigel. Talking about having the right people in place is one thing. What are your thoughts, though, on getting the nation to become more independent as well? Because I feel there's a lot of dependency syndrome out there. So how can we help people become take a bit more responsibility rather than always blaming the government and hoping people bail them out?
It's relatively easy to help people in this room. Because people in this room have already got up off their backsides and said, I want to have a go. I want to have a go. I want to establish myself, I want to run a business, I want to try and make some money. The problem that we have, and again, it's one of those subjects, it's really hard to talk about. But I'm Nigel Farage, and I really couldn't care less what anyone thinks. It's that, the welfare state, the post-World War II welfare state, the Attlee dream, you have to understand why it happened. When they came back in 1918, Lloyd George's land fit for heroes didn't happen. Limbless ex-servicemen living rough on the streets. I mean, hard to imagine how bleak it must have been in the 1920s in the wake of World War I. In the wake of World War II, Attlee gave people this promise, that nobody would be left out, there'd be a national health service, pensions would improve, and actually, a civil society carries its weakest. We do it in our families, don't we? All of us in our families have someone that goes through hard times or bad health issues, and we rally round and we try and help them. And I think of the nation like an extended family. There's a collective sense together that we are part of something. It's why I always thought the European Union was a load of nonsense. Because people actually want to be French or German or British, and we can be friends together without saying we're all the same. It was never going to work. The problem is this, that the safety net has now led to two things. One is what I call drug dependency. If someone gives you a drug and you get addicted to it, you want to keep having the drug. And if that drug is a check it's not a check anymore, it's a bank transfer, but if it's that transfer every week, you start to get into a mentality that you can't survive without it. So the first thing you get is dependency. The second thing you get, which is even more worrying, is that the safety net becomes a glass ceiling. So, you know, if I'm living in the Greater London area, say I'm married, living in the Greater London area, got a couple of kids, got an elderly, disabled relative, I can get, through state benefits, £29,500 a year. All right? That's £29,500 a year without having to pay any tax on it. So that means that one of the couple has to go to work and start earning at least £45,000 a year. Otherwise, you're better off on benefits than you are going out to work. So we've got this desperate problem where for so many people, it simply isn't worth going out to work. And I think, I mean, getting people off dependency, you know, is, whether it's welfare or cocaine or whatever it is not an easy thing. And I'm probably not the best qualified person to speak on that. But to give people aspiration, and the only way, and I tell you something, if that budget this week had a shred of imagination, the one way that we reverse that is you have to lift the threshold at which people start paying tax. And I think if we lifted the threshold to £20,000 a year, we'd be stunned how many people would say, oh, do you know what? Actually, it is worth us getting off benefits and going back to work. The alternative is to cut benefits. But that's very difficult. Benefits, it's rather like a big snarling Alsatian, right? You've got a bone in your pocket. Now, you can choose not to give the Alsatian a bone, but once you've given it, you try and get the bugger back. and so cutting benefits is politically impossible. Therefore, you have to incentivise people to get off, and I think that's something we're going to have to think about. The other problem here, and again, I don't have the answer, but it's extraordinary. 2.8 million people in this country now on disability benefit, right? That is 4 times the number who were on disability benefit in 1981. And even allowing for a bigger population, that is the most extraordinary rise. You think about 40 years ago, there were a lot more people working physically, a lot more people working in factories, a lot more people working in dangerous trades, a lot more genuine industrial injuries were happening 40 years ago. No, I mean, do you know what the biggest cause now of people being off work with disability? Mental health. Mental health. And I, accept that the pandemic, or at least the lockdowns, the successive lockdowns, did do big psychological damage to this nation. In fact, I think we'll look back in history, I think we'll look back at the second and third lockdowns as the worst decision ever made by any peacetime government. I think the whole thing was dreadful, and the financial cost, the psychological cost. But I mean, we're bringing kids up. This probably sounds a bit hard-nosed, but we're bringing kids up to believe that things that normally happen in our lives, like your grandparents die, or some event like that happens in your life, rather than that being just life, or one of the rough knocks you have to accept, we're now telling kids that's trauma. Yeah, that's trauma. And we're over-diagnosing mental health. I'm sorry, I mean, and I'm not being unsympathetic. I've seen genuine mental health problems in people close to me. I'm sure everyone in this room has seen it. But we're over-diagnosing this, and we're trying to treat it with drugs from Big Pharma. Can you believe 1 in 4 people in Scotland is on some form of prescription drug? And most of those are either drugs to lift them up, or if they're active young kids who should be playing football, drugs to put them down. So we've got some major problems here. And culturally, we've got to start addressing this mental health problem. Not by being Victorian about it, but by explaining to youngsters, you know what? Bad things happen in life. People die, we have car crashes, we break bones, we lose money, we get robbed. This is life. You can't treat those incidents as trauma. They're not. They're part of everyday life. Now, as you can imagine, I'm a complete voice in the wilderness on this at the moment, but I tell you what, I won't be in 5 years' time, because we simply cannot go on paying millions of people who physically should be working and are not working. We can't afford to do it, and, can I add, it's very unfair on those that do work and are being taxed more and more and more. And when Hunt stood up in that budget, or that excuse for the budget this week, I mean, God help us. When Hunt stood up and said that the median earner is now paying less tax than anybody since 1975, well, what he didn't talk about was the increase in excise duties on alcohol and tobacco. What he didn't talk about was the extent to which car tax has gone up. What he didn't talk about was the extent to which we pay more VAT now than we've ever paid. What he didn't talk about was how much council tax has gone up. And far from us being the least taxed since 1975, we are now the most taxed that we've been since 1948. Can you believe that? When we were literally bankrupted at the end of World War II, and we've now virtually bankrupted ourselves again, and the pandemic and our approach to it played a very, very big part in that. I escaped during the second lockdown. I just couldn't cope anymore. I just thought, I just can't deal with this. So I went to America. That was difficult because I had to quarantine in the West Indies on the way in for a fortnight. Absolute nightmare. But it was really interesting. It was really interesting. I went to Los Angeles and I saw a city that was completely closed down. It was difficult in downtown LA to even get a coffee. Everything was closed. Nobody was about. Everybody was effectively locked up. And then I went to Florida, run by Ron DeSantis, who was a very good governor of Florida, but not quite good enough to beat Donald Trump in the primaries. And he took a totally different approach. And so if you went into a bar or a restaurant or a coffee shop, there'd be somebody at the front door who would temperature test you. You were made, you were slathered in, antiseptic stuff before you went in. The tables were spaced apart a bit more than they would have been before. And you think about this, the same climate in Florida as the climate that they have in California. And at the end of it, one stayed open, one closed, death rates were identical, but one did not suffer economic damage, and one did not suffer psychological damage in the way that California did. So I just hope if they ever try to do that to us again, that we rebel in a way that's never been seen before. I really do. You know what? If I have to be martyred in the process of this and locked up, well, I'm volunteering now to do that.
That's amazing, amazing. Give me a round of applause for that. I was about to hand it back to Matt, but I have to comment on something. Did you know I used to be a psychiatric nurse?
I didn't know that. No.
So I echo everything you've just said. 110%. Depression, I believe, is a behaviour. I believe it's okay to feel depressed. I don't think you have something like that. I don't want to talk about that now because people might start throwing chairs at me. It's fine. But what can we do because education is the key.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coach. Who does a lot of coaching here? Mindset coaching, helping people with anxiety. There's quite a few people here, right? Now these beautiful people have to run Facebook ads, try and get people to buy from them, do all that kind of, and these genuine people who can literally go to the core of what's causing these external issues with mental health and all that kind of stuff, but yet they have to run around running a business where the government are not commissioning people like this to actually go and educate people. So what can we do to get more people out there to do preventative care rather than tertiary level care?
Well, that applies, of course, not just to mental health, but to physical health as well, doesn't it? And, we've got this chronic obesity crisis. It's not as bad here as it is in America, but goodness me, we've seen the number of overweight kids. And it's really, really quite frightening. I suspect that over the course of the next couple of decades, that the effect of childhood obesity is going to be the biggest health problem we've probably ever seen. You made the point about education, and I keep making the point about education. There are good schools out there and there are good teachers out there, but generally I think the way we're educating children is deeply, deeply disturbing. I think there is an element of, political propaganda that has been put into them. They're being taught to hate the country they come from. They're not being encouraged to be competitive. And at the end of the day, life is competitive. Little Johnny can't win every running race. It just doesn't work like that. Life is unfair. Some people have more ability than others. Learn that, accept that, grow up, get it, understand it. The problem with that argument is that to turn around the education system is going to take a long time. You can't just wave a magic wand and a whole educational establishment. You know, the march through the institutions of the liberal left. And that's actually what we're dealing with here. They've been massively successful. And as for our universities, well, frankly, many of them I view as being madrasas of Marxism. And I mean, the extent to which left-wing orthodoxy is in place in universities, the shouting down of different opinions, the cancelling of speakers. I mean, of all the places you should be exposed to every idea, every theory, every philosophy, it should be at university. You should listen to everybody. And yet you get speakers being cancelled, you get appalling scenes, and nothing gets done by the vice-chancellors or anybody else. And then you've got other Cambridge colleges now living off money from the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, talk about the need for reform. Our education system needs wholesale reform, but it will involve government being engaged in an epic battle. And it'll take several years to do it. But ultimately, education is the key. It's not the whole answer, but it's much of the answer to many of these questions.
Nigel, so I think everyone in this room is in an awesome position at the minute, because I know we're officially supposed to be in a recession, and I always tell everyone just don't take part in it. That's what we did in 2008. When we grew like hell, I just told everyone, do not take part in the recession. So when everyone else is worried about spending, everyone else just goes out and smashes it. Biggest opportunity ever, and you know lots of billionaires and millionaires like I do, and this is the land of opportunity right now. Now you're a bit of a master when it comes to promotions, obviously with Brexit. We won't get into that too much, we're not a politics show, but we're campaigning, and you're very good at self-promotion, almost as good as me, my Ferrari and my gates. However, your social media, so advice on people starting, so a lot of people may not know about you, so you're very entrepreneurial. I think he's the biggest ever, highest paid person to go in, I must let me get me out of here. Is that true?
Oh yeah. I'll tell you why in a minute.
1.5 million. So tips on how people can use social media. You're awesome, so you've been doing this for some time.
Okay, well firstly on the jungle, they've been chasing me since 2016. And you know, every year, will you come in the jungle? I said no. I was worried that it was a show that you did when you were on your way down, rather than on your way up, and yet 2023 was my best year since 2016. My epic fight with the banks on debanking, you know, and exposing that what had happened to me. I mean, did you see last year 140,000 small businesses were closed down by British banks? I'm sure many of you in this room have experienced problems and difficulties. Well, I tell you what, whether it's all of them, it's all of them, and it's a real problem. So I'd fought this great battle against the banks, which I did to some extent. The trouble with Brexit was, you either love Nigel Farage or think he's the devil, because it was a very divisive referendum. You know, and the passions on both sides, the splits in families, and kind of the debanking thing helped me a lot. The sort of classic email on my website was, "Dear Mr. Farage, I don't normally agree with you, but..." So I'd done the banking thing, and that had gone very well. And then unbelievably, I won the television radio industry's annual award for News Presenter of the Year. That was fun. So it was a big dinner at the Grosvenor House in London, and it was all the BBC, ITV, Sky, you know, Channel 5, you know, the sort of, you know, the London lovies basically. And you know, when my name got read out as the winner, I mean, they were horrified. I mean, I was about as welcome as I'd been in the European Parliament before that. So I walk up to the stage, and there's one or two people jeering and booing. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to ruin your evening now. And so I said to them, well, the fact that I've won this, and GB News is now challenging you and beating you on some days, I said, no wonder you're upset. I said, because GB News and I, we're going to cost you all your jobs, you're all going to get fired. And that really set the evening off beautifully. So I'd had a couple of big hits last year, I was doing very well, and yet when the jungle came, what I did realise was this, and it links back to social media, what I did realise was this, that kind of everybody over 18 knows who I am. You know, I can't really go anywhere. I wear these disguises, but none of them seem to really work. It's as soon as I speak, it's gone, of course, you know. But the under 18s or the under 20s really don't know me, because when the referendum took place, they were 12 or 13 years old, and I knew from my own kids growing up that the young audience watching and voting and taking part in I'm a Celebrity is just off the charts. It's just massive. So I had 3 objectives in going in. One was to reach a young audience and to back it up with TikTok and all the social media tools that they use. The second reason for going in was I thought, well, maybe with the older audience, there are some people who don't like me because of what they've read about me or heard about me. They're going to see me for 3 weeks. As it turned out, they saw all of me for 3 weeks. I mean, who ever heard of having a shower with your underwear on? I wasn't doing any of that. I have to be honest, I did know that would cause a bit of a stir. I'm totally unembarrassable. And then the third point, and it's a point actually that's relevant to all of us when we're in negotiations. You know, I thought to myself, what is the upper maximum limit they can even contemplate paying? I think the previous highest they paid was Noel Edmonds, which is about 750,000. So I just thought, right, go for the big number. They came back and said it's ridiculous. I said, well, that's fine then, I won't do it this year. Oh, no, I'm sure we can have a chat. Then they made a counter offer, and they gave me 24 hours to respond. And I was doing it with an agent, and I just said to her, she said, come on, we've got an hour to go. What are we going to say? I said, do you know what we're going to say? We're going to say nothing. And sometimes in a business deal, in a negotiation, waiting for the other side to blink is the way to do it. So it worked, and they paid me a stack of money. So it was pretty good news all round. But something else I learned, because I was in business. I set up my own business in 1993. I set up my own futures business in metals trading. So, you know, I know the struggles that many of you have been through, and employment law and regulation and doing the VAT, and so I know about these things. But that was something else I learned, was with telephone sales. You know, just as I didn't blink in the deal with I'm a Celebrity, the best people selling on the telephone are those who use silence the best. You know, it's that when you put the ball in the other person's court and say, well, shall we do business? And that agonizing little bit of silence comes. The great lesson is, folks, don't say anything. Wait for them to say something. So these things are important. TikTok now, I hate the fact that it's owned by the Chinese, but it's there, it exists. So I operate, Matt, across all the social media platforms. I don't put vast amounts of content out, but I put out things that I think are relevant. I think you can overuse social media. Getting the balance right is very, very important. My best tweet today is that I've woken up this morning very, very happy because I've learned that Theresa May is retiring from politics. So yeah, and what amazes me about people in media and people in politics is hardly any of them use social media effectively. And I suspect the same applies to many small businesses. You know, whenever I want to sort of look for something like, you go onto the website of a little local company, and more often than not, it's rubbish. More often than not, it's out of date. More often than not, you can't navigate your way around it. And it's a pretty easy, obvious way, isn't it, for all of these people to give themselves a hell of a leg up, is to make sure you've got a good website, you've got social media, you use it, you engage with people, and like everything, the biggest key to success, biggest single key to success in anything we do is to work harder than the opposition. And I'm 60 in a few weeks. I've done a variety of things over my life, but whatever I've done, I've always worked harder than everybody else. And I just don't think there's any magic shortcut. I think you have to have vision. I think you have to have patience with whatever you do, but I think you have to work damn hard. That's how I've done it anyway. You know, whether I've been a success or not is subjective, but I like to think I might have been.
I want to talk about your best friend, and we'll start getting some questions. I know a lot of you are very engaged on the phone questions at Nigel. So last week, I had my team saying you realise Nigel's in America with his mate Donald Trump. You're in Miami, I believe that is.
Mar-a-Lago, yeah.
Yeah. And then I realised, hang on a second, is he going to come? Because he's with Miami with probably the most famous man in the world. And then he's looking at his diary, he's supposed to be in Tiverton. Am I in trouble here or not? He turned up. So when I was becoming an entrepreneur, I bought all of Trump's books. I still got them all now. Well, who's read all Trump's books? Entrepreneurial books, fantastic. I do Robert Kiyosaki and Yeah. Awesome stuff. Really
It's a good book, isn't it?
Really admire what he's done. And I believe people like him should be running our country, like he did, not flipping politicians come out of university, never. I remember you saying to me once, never had a paper out before, let alone a business.
Yeah.
So, Donald, and you've got to do your impression. Your mate Donald.
He's just so great. He's the best. He's the greatest ever. He's going to win this election. I mean, Biden, God help us, Biden.
A DJ story.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, if you go to Mar-a-Lago, first off, it's a palace. I call it the Versailles of Florida. It was built in the 1920s. It was designed originally to be, oddly, the Winter White House, which is why he bought it. It's just magnificent. You know, imported marble from Italy, a level of workmanship that you just couldn't probably even reproduce these days. It's a magnificent place, and everything about it is perfect. Everything is perfect. The food's amazing, the wine list to die for, the service is magnificent, and everything with him has to be the best. It's got to be the best. He is an absolute perfectionist in terms of the product that he puts on for the paying customer. Now, the paying customer with Trump has to pay. You know, it's not cheap, but it's very, very good. And it's hilarious because we were there last summer. I would have a meeting with him. He said, "You sticking around for dinner?" "Yeah, I'm sticking around for dinner." So you have dinner, and there on the table is an iPad. And he asks people around the table, "What sort of music do you like?" I think it's a very odd question to ask at the start of the dinner. And REM, yeah, and he DJs. He DJs through dinner, he takes requests, and if people come up to say, "Hello, Mr. President," but they spend a bit too long there, he just turns the volume up. He is, I mean, you can love him or hate him. You can love him or hate him for what he stands for, but he is genuinely a larger-than-life personality. He's incredibly good with people. He loves meeting people. What you see in public is as nothing to what he's like in private. He's genuinely very, very funny. Probably on the outrageous side of funny, but he is who he is. He was a guy in his late 70s that grew up in New York, you know, with his building career. He took on the mafia, he took on all the big guys. He's tough as old boots, but he's great, great fun. And that whole Trump world, man, you know, I've been around it now for 8 years. I've got to know his kids very well, the people that work for him, the family. The wife is absolutely beautiful. I mean, you know, one of those few people that is just genuinely, naturally, incredibly beautiful. And I've had a lot of fun with him. And, you know, one of my favourites is the one about Ukraine, where you ask him, you say, "Well, if you'd been president, would Putin have invaded Ukraine?" He says, "You know, I told Putin, those domes in Moscow, those beautiful great big domes in Moscow, you invade Ukraine, they won't bleep, 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 bleep be there." And I believe every word of it. Because actually, peace in the world comes through strength, not through weakness. And we've learned that all the way through our history. So I've had a lot of fun with him. I've seen him in happy times. I've seen him in times when the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I'll talk in general terms about him. I've never ever betrayed the things we talk about. And I think the reason he likes me is he feels that Brexit led to a wave of rebellion in America that helped to get him in. And also he knows that I'm not trying to make a fast buck off the back of him. And he's surrounded by people who sell stories about him and write newspaper articles about him. I tell a few little jokes, but I don't ever betray those confidences. And I think it's a funny thing. The higher up you go in the world, you know, when you finish up as the chief executive of a company that's grown from nothing, the phone stops ringing. Because people think you're too busy and too important to take a phone call. And the higher you go in life, in any profession, the lonelier it becomes. It's really interesting. And I remember, you know, I took little UKIP, but it was little UKIP, into being really quite big UKIP. And suddenly, the more successful the party became, the more lonely I became. And also, who could I trust? Who could I trust?
I had the exact same thing with Michael Jackson. When he turned 50, I thought, I'm not going to ring him because he must be getting everyone ringing from all around the world. And when I did speak to him a week later, he said, "No one called me for my birthday." He spent it on his own.
Yeah, I think real success does lead to that. And I think for Trump, it's very hard to trust anybody. And I think I'm one of those people that he can trust. And he's right to trust me. And I'm right behind him. And he is going to be the 47th president of the USA. I have little doubt about it. And, you know, he might be a bit rough for some. He may say things that people find a bit too rich. But he does actually do stuff. And I think the Abraham Accords were the most astonishing achievement. To get a series of Arab states to sign up to peace, trade, tourism, and normalisation with Israel, it was a massive, massive achievement that sadly now has been smashed to smithereens.
Okay, we're going to do some Q&As. The first one just came through on a message earlier on, which I thought was quite interesting, which I'm going to help you explain, because I don't quite understand it. Matt, any chance I can get a picture of 9-inch Nigel? You can ask him.
Oh dear, we're in trouble here.
Hi Nigel, any chance of a pig?
Well, you'd have to ask Matt about
9-inch
that.
Nige, just what we call it.
Where's that come from, Nigel?
I thought it was a reference to a News of the World story about me many years ago, which I think I've managed to erase from the internet. Anyway, there we are. Moving on.
Right, come on, Sam. Anyone sends me a message like that, you're a legend. Give a round of applause.
Yeah, go on.
You're a 9-inch Nigel.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, let's do it. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming down to Devon. I really appreciate it. It's a lovely historical town of Tiverton. With the World Economic Forum infiltrating global politics, and Steiner, when asked Westminster or Davos, he says Davos. How do we combat this level of global governance that is doesn't have humanity's best interests at heart?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, again, we go back to, I mean, you can't, there's no conversation we have today where we don't start at 1945. Because everything is the post-war settlement. You know, after the horrors and the atrocities of the Holocaust, which, by the way, I think a younger generation have forgotten about, which I find really quite disturbing. But after the horrors of the Holocaust and 100 million people dying, we set up a group of institutions across the world to try to make sure it can never happen again. We set up the European Court of Human Rights. We set up the United Nations. We did all those things because we believed that through friendship and trading together, we'd avoid those conflicts. That principle, by the way, is 100% right. But what's happened is those organisations have now become quasi-governments themselves. We saw it with the European Union. Increasingly, we're seeing it with the United Nations. And the World Health Organization are trying to get all of our governments in May, so it's not far away, to sign up to a pandemic treaty that would give them the right to tell us we have to lock down. Well, over my dead body, frankly, is how I view that one. And the WEF is the same thing for big corporate companies. And you know, if you're a Goldman Sachs, you're a Facebook, you're a Google, you're a BlackRock, you're whatever, you don't really have any loyalty to any country. For you, it's just about making money. It's about having... Is that me?
You get us on next, Matt.
Yeah, you've got no loyalty.
There you go.
It's Morse code, come on, did you recognise it? Yeah, you've got no loyalty to any country. You don't give a damn about countries, but you love the idea of big global government. Because the bigger government is, the more global government is, the more power the big corporations have over it. And I saw this in my 20 years in Brussels. You know, big companies with massive lobbying operations, taking out people who work for the Commission, MEPs. You know, I mean, I could have gone out, I literally could have gone for breakfast, lunch and dinner every single day with their lobbyists. I didn't, I chose not to. So that's what we're seeing. And the WEF is really a symptom. It isn't the WEF that's controlling the world. The WEF is a symptom of this move to global government. And the reason that Brexit is such a massive historical event, not just in Britain, but across the entirety of the world, is it was the first time since 1945 that a country had reversed that move to decisions being taken at a level above the nation state and at a level where our vote can't change our future. So really, I think, you know, where we're going with this is you've got the globalists on the one hand and the nationists or nationalists on the other hand. And politically, it's very interesting. I think that even though Brexit, we've not made the most of it, it's happened. It isn't going to be reversed. We now own the status quo, rather than the other way round. Across the whole of Europe, we're now seeing political parties on the rise, ahead of the European elections this June, who very much want the control to be at the nation-state level. I mean, look at the French farmers. Look at the French farmers. I mean, the French are revolting. And there's no question. Oh, I said that wrong. No, but the French are revolting. Literally, they are revolting. They closed off the 8 main roads into Paris. I mean, these guys really mean it. And Macron goes to them and says, "Don't worry, I'm going to solve your problems. I'm going to go to Brussels and ask for permission to change the legislation." I mean, in doing that, Macron admitted that France had given away its sovereignty, that he as president wasn't in charge of French agriculture. And I want international cooperation. I want us to get on with our neighbours. I want us to get on with as many people around the world as we possibly can. But I believe that the nation state is the thing, and I talked about extended family earlier on. The nation state is like our extended family. It's what we're a part of. It's what we owe some degree of loyalty to. It's what we pay our taxes to, albeit slightly reluctantly, but we do. And I believe a world run by democratic nation states is a world more likely to give peace and prosperity than a world run by half a dozen big companies controlling global government. And that's how I feel about it.
The headlines tomorrow will be Nigel Farage about Fiddes events, the French are revolting. Denise.
Hi Nigel, thank you for coming in. It's really good to see you and hear you speak. I've got 3 adult children. One of them may vote in the elections. Now I had it drilled into me by my mum about the sacrifice women make to vote, and I will vote. But it's such a hard choice where there's no one I actually want to vote for. There's no difference in them, they're all as equally bad as each other. How can I get my young adult children to engage and vote?
I completely understand how they feel. And that's me saying that. You've spent 25 years encouraging people to vote. I don't think the system we have is fit for purpose in the 21st century. I think the absolutism of first past the post means we finished up with a Conservative Party that is a coalition between its different wings, a Labour Party that's a coalition between its different wings, and they've both become big state, high tax social democrats. I mean, the budget was classic. Starmer agreed with virtually everything in the budget. It would have made no difference if Rachel Reeves had delivered that budget as opposed to Jeremy Hunt. So this sort of, they're all the same. They really are all the same. The differences are pretty marginal, to be honest with you. I think we have to, I mean, after the Brexit Party achieved its goal, which I was enormously proud of, we did a heck of a job. And we got rid of Mrs May as Prime Minister, and we helped Boris in as Prime Minister, which looked clever at the time. Not looking quite so good now, though. You know, I changed the name of the party to Reform. I then became the honorary president because I wanted to go into broadcasting and do other things, and Richard Tice took it over. The point about Reform was that Brexit gives you back self-governance. It's now what you do with that self-governance and how you shape that self-governance. And I believe that first past the post absolutism, a lot of young people are saying, do you know what? I just don't agree with this. If we had a multiplicity of parties that were represented in Westminster on a more proportional basis, your kids would then find a party they agree with. We now vote for the party we dislike the least. We're not voting for the party that we like. And I think with PR, we'd actually start voting for the party that we like. Yes, it would mean coalitions have to be formed. That's number one reform. Second reform is we have an upper house, a revising chamber, with the ability to block legislation in the House of Lords, now made up with hundreds of mates of Tony Blair and David Cameron. I mean, they're all the same blooming people. They all live within the same 3 postcodes in West London. They're not representative of the country in any way at all. I think the House of Lords has become a complete and utter abomination. I think the whole thing is a disgrace. I think the way they're trying to stop even the attempt to get Rwanda going this week just goes right against majority public opinion in this country, goes right against the principle of the last 2019 election. I'd abolish the House of Lords in its current state and replace it with an elected chamber. I believe we have to, the people that make our laws and shape our laws should be directly accountable to us. The third thing I'd do to shake up British politics, that referendum, we'd never have left the European Union if we hadn't been asked. Right? Would never have happened. I believe the best run country in the world is Switzerland, and the Swiss have the ability at a local canton level or at a national level, if they're not happy with the direction of government and parliament, they can call a binding referendum on any issue they choose. Gosh, I tell you what, if we could call referendums, we'd have some very different policies in place, wouldn't we? We really would. So I'm all for completely updating, changing our system, making it fit for the 21st century. Then your kids would engage.
It's like a series of question time programme. Nigel, I'm going to have a go. Are you going to run for Prime Minister?
Well, if we had a presidential system, if we were a presidential system, then I would run. But we're not. So we're not a presidential system. Equally, we don't have open primaries.
Can't you set something up independent where all the entrepreneurs get behind you? Who would get behind Nigel?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Remember, I'm
9-inch.
Well, that might get a few votes.
We'll rebrand you to 20-inch Nigel.
Yeah, I'm not so keen on the photograph. But anyway, never mind.
Are you going to run for Prime Minister?
If we were in any other country in Europe, right, I would lead a party into a general election. The worst outcome is I'd be Deputy Prime Minister. You know, could I get the same vote Maloney got in Italy? Yes, I could. No question at all. Could I get the same vote Wilders got in the Netherlands? Yes, I could. We don't have that system. Equally, we don't have open primaries. Donald Trump wasn't even in politics. But because of open primaries, the Conservative Party of America, the Republicans, voted him in as their leader. He became president. What we're stuck with, and I was going back to that a moment ago, is a very difficult, brutal first-past-the-post system. So I kind of find myself in the wrong country, in some ways, given the support I've got. I've not yet made my mind up what I'm going to do in terms of when I'm going to do it.
No comment.
No, it's not no comment.
No comment normally means yes.
No. No, listen to me. I said I have not decided when I'm going to do something.
Trying to get the headline here.
When I'm going to do something. Whether that's before this election, or whether I sit this one out and wait, I think there is going to be, even with the difficulties of our system, I think there's a major reshaping of British politics to come. It's happening. The Conservative Party have betrayed anybody who's even vaguely centre-right, who's even vaguely small state, who's even vaguely entrepreneurial. They have been betrayed by this Conservative Party. Something very big is coming. The election that I'm really looking to, the next one's over, Labour have won. But by 2029, I think we need to have a resurgent, new political brand in Britain. And whether that's a reverse takeover of the Tories or not, I don't know. So Matt, I haven't decided. I may well, I may not, I may wait. I genuinely haven't decided. But at some point, I've got one more big card to play. And I will play it. It's just a question of when.
I will take that as a yes anyway.
You must work the Daily Mirror is all I can say.
Sean Batcher, running for Mayor of London. One is C40. Do you know anything about it?
I do, yes.
Okay.
I do. This is the traffic scheme that Mayor Khan has got us all signed up for. Yeah, I get that.
No, it's not. It's
But-
beyond that.
Well,
Beyond
okay.
lines. But anyway, Mayor Khan has left a debt of 15.3 billion since November 23. What do you feel about him?
About Khan, Well, I won't go into full Lee Anderson mode, because that might not be helpful. Although I got the gist of what Lee was saying. Do you know what I thought was absolutely horrifying? And you know, Khan will always play the Islamophobic card. And yet, I thought what happened in Parliament Square the other week was appalling. You know, we had a resolution before Parliament that the Speaker had accepted from the SNP on Gaza, and it felt like a mob outside were intimidating. And I tell you what, MPs I know were blooming scared, genuinely scared to leave the building. And to put up on the Elizabeth Tower that houses Big Ben, from the river to the sea. And we all know what that means. It doesn't just mean the obliteration of Israel, it means the obliteration of the people within Israel. I mean, it's virtually genocidal in terms of its implications. And that was put up on the Elizabeth Tower. The police did not arrest one single person, and Khan didn't criticise it. So I do think Khan is deeply hypocritical. I think his agenda for London has been disastrous, and most of all, I mean, his ULEZ extension. So I live right on the boundaries of North Kent and South London. The furthest part from central London is still Greater London. And whether you live inside the zone or outside the zone, it affects you, because it's £12.50 every time you go past the camera, although where I live, there are no cameras, because they keep being vandalised. I, of course, could not possibly support such behaviour. But what's amazing about ULEZ, and people in Devon won't know this, or other places, the only people that pay ULEZ are the poor and the old. I don't pay ULEZ, because I've got a nice car. But if I've got friends, you know, retired friends, who live close to me, or I might see them in the pub or church or whatever it is, and they happen to pay this £12.50, you know, and they're living on fixed incomes, they're struggling because their cars are too old and they can't afford to upgrade them. So everything Khan has done has been a disaster. Regrettably, though, I fear that he's going to win.
Well, do something very special in the press next week.
Okay. Well, I'll have a look at Ladbrokes on the way home. Well, I wish you well, but I'm afraid the odds are heavily stacked. The odds are heavily stacked in Khan's favour. And
it is first past the post, as you know.
I know it is, yeah. But I mean, going back to the earlier point, I missed something actually. Postal voting. George Galloway won in Rochdale on postal votes. 43% of the turnout in that by-election was postal votes. People being signed up for postal votes, and those votes being literally harvested at the door. It is so open to fraud and corruption, it's not true, and I fear that Khan's big advantage in London is he's got the postal vote.
He's not going to win.
All right, great stuff, good luck.
Hi Nigel, I'm in the health and social sector. Obviously CQC has just had a big mix-up. Again, you know, they're doing. How do you feel about the health and social? Because out in the field, it's horrendous. Not just for us, but for the vulnerable, regardless of age, because obviously it's 18 upwards.
Yeah, I mean, this whole issue of social care and the separation of functions.
I honestly believe it's almost like the government is trying to control social care. Obviously they do anyway, but it's almost like if you're not on their framework, they don't want to know you. And yet they've got hundreds of thousands of vulnerable adults either in their homes, in their hospitals, in respite homes, in rehabilitation, that need help, need support, need care, need humans contact. Not just sitting in a bed, just sitting there waiting to see if they're going to get any visitors.
I'm going to answer that by going a bit more broadly from social care to health as a whole. We talked earlier about the NHS, about its failings, about what's going wrong, about the fact that our realistic expectations of GP appointments aren't being met, that the knee replacement might take 2 years or whatever it is. I do think this, I think that those that have money and those that can afford it need to be encouraged to get treatment outside the NHS. Increasingly, it's happening anyway. You know, I know in Essex there are private GPs now open 24 hours a day. You want an appointment, it's called at 4 tomorrow morning. It costs you 50 quid or 60 quid, but at least you can get an appointment. Now, obviously, for those that can't afford it, go back to the safety net and being in a civilised society, I actually think, given the crisis we're in, if we were to give a tax incentive for people to opt out of the National Health Service and to pay for someone like you themselves to come in to visit them once a day or twice a week or whatever it was, that at least would bring some relief. It's not the total answer, but I actually think that for most people on reasonable salaries or good pensions, if they had the chance of getting tax relief to get private health care, do you know what? I think a lot of people would go for it. I really do.
Can I
Please.
just add?
Please.
My company is in Leicestershire.
Yeah.
Some of my clients have what they call a direct payment, where the council obviously top up their part, they then are able to pay for their own care.
Yeah.
It's keeping their independence. Is the government aware? They must be, surely. Leicestershire County Council will only pay £12 per hour for social care. Most companies charge £23 to £35 an hour. I've got one client who has just received letters from Leicestershire County Council. They made a mistake in 2007, overpaid her, and they are now demanding £2,000 back. She hasn't got it. She is 5 months in arrears with me on her invoices. Most companies would dump her. She's 5-6 grand in arrears.
Yeah.
I can't. That poor woman needs help. How can councils only pay £12 an hour?
I don't know. You know, I mean, you're telling me something that is beyond my level of expertise, and what I don't know, things I'm very honest about it. You know, I don't know the answer to
I'll
this.
vote for Nigel when he runs.
Well, no one's got a magic wand. You know, that's quite important.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly before Nigel goes, Nigel, I know you know it's not a financial advice. I want to point that out, but you know it's quite a bit about investment.
Yeah.
We're seeing a bit of dip in, certainly around here. House prices are down like 25%.
Yeah.
There's going to be a massive property crash.
I-
What's going to happen with the interest rates in your experience?
I do think that we're going to have a debt crisis at some point. I think if you look at the numbers, we're much more indebted than we were in 2008 at national level, corporate level, and individual level. That's worth remembering. So there will be a credit crunch at some point, as there was in 08. I doubt it'll be as bad as 08 because the banks are far better capitalised than they were then. That's your downside risk. Basically, the property market is not going to fall much further, in my opinion. Through history, you see these 20-30% dips. They happen. Look, high-end property may fall. You know, your £5 million house in Chelsea might fall a lot, but that's not what most of us are talking about. We're talking about the most people, lower middle end of the housing market. It can't fall far because the population's exploding. It can't fall far because there is a shortage of houses. So, no, my view is that whilst houses may not rocket, I think houses are beginning to get quite cheap. I think now is a good time to be looking at the housing market, but I am myself having a look at the housing market right now. The other thing that's really fascinating, and I'm not giving you investment advice, but cryptocurrencies, which I've been talking about for many, many years, to the derision of typical of Farage, the FT says, typical of Farage to back cryptocurrencies. All I've said to people is they should have a small percentage, perhaps 2% to 5% of their portfolio should be in cryptocurrency. I believe it's here to stay. What you've seen this year is the normalization of crypto because the ETF you can trade on the American exchanges, it's now regulated. I go to Miami regularly, as we mentioned earlier. You can now buy everything from a Starbucks coffee to a Ferrari on crypto in Miami. It's happening. It isn't just the Wild West. It isn't just having a bet. In fact, there is a race meeting in Exeter this afternoon, funny enough. It isn't just betting on the horses. This is now something that's becoming a means of exchange. I think the normalisation of crypto will continue. It can't be stopped. And the third thing I'll say is, for those who haven't noticed it, gold has just broken out of its all-time historic highs. It's about 1,700 or 2,140 in dollars. I spent 20 years in the metals business, but as I say, when I had a proper job before politics. And I do think gold's got further to go. And even if it hasn't, I do honestly believe that gold is a great, again, safe haven. If we're worried about markets, we're worried about credit crunches. Anyway, none of that's financial advice. It's just my thinking.
Okay, make your hand up for a while. One jack here. There you go.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for coming up. I was born in Rhodesia, and what we're seeing here in the UK, the UK government, is very much what we experienced in 1999 to 2002 in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, well, let's hope it's not.
Forgive me if I'm wrong. Do we not have an army? Do we not have a navy? Do we not have an air force? Why is the immigration problem not being handled by our military?
Well, it shouldn't have to be handled by our military because we have something called border force. But I'm afraid we're stuck, and I'm going to give a very quick answer on this. But
I'll make any more comments about Dover.
But look, you know, if people can illegally cross the English Channel, come into this country, and have a 99% chance of staying, and being given a 4-star hotel and 38 quid a week spending money, they're going to keep coming. We used to deport people who came illegally. We've stopped doing that. We're bound up by the European Convention on Human Rights. The British judges use that. So actually the answer is not the army, the answer is not the army, the answer is to change the law, the answer is to leave the European Convention on Human Rights and to be a sovereign country controlling its own borders with a very, very strong message that no country in Europe has been more welcoming to immigrant communities from all over the world than we have. No country in Europe has the connections around the world that we have through the Commonwealth and all of these things. And with the least prejudiced people, probably in the world. This is a very open, tolerant, accepting country, and we have been for centuries. But we do not like, frankly, having the mickey taken out of us, and that we will go back to deporting anyone that comes illegally. And it can be done. Australia did it in 2012. Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister. He towed the boats back to Indonesia, and guess what? They stopped coming.
I am calling you as a Commonwealth citizen. Please do something, because you're the only one who can see what's got any guts to speak up.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of Nigel, obviously. And when I went on his show, Talking Pints, years ago, I got a stick going on it. People don't understand him, but as you can see, he's very knowledgeable. He cares, he's got a big heart for everyone, he's a good guy. And he's different to all the others. And for him to give up his time today on going from Donald Trump, Malibu to Tiverton and Devon, give him a big round of applause.
Well, it is.
Good problem to have.
No, it's a good problem to have, but Tiverton's so great, so great. I mean,
And at this stage, because you all stand up and make your way, follow Bish, and give them a nice big round of applause, everyone. Thank you very much.